Hey, what's up YouTube? What's going on? Back here with a new video today. And in today's new video, what we're going to be talking about is a new research study that was recently published, and it's something that is actually very interesting, and I'm happy to kind of share this with you, and I wanted to talk about this with you guys because I feel like this could be very beneficial to a lot of you guys out there, specifically if you guys are runners or involved in a running sport, and especially if you have back pain. This is a really interesting study. So this study was published in the journal Biomechanics, and it was accepted back in the end of November, and it was titled Biomechanical Consequences of Running with a Deep Core Muscle Weakness. So the authors were Margit Rabe and Ajit Shahardi. So what the authors and researchers were looking to accomplish is they were looking to determine that when individuals were running, they were using a motion analysis software which allowed them to induce weakness in certain deep core muscles. And by inducing this muscular weakness in certain deep core muscles, they were looking for compensation. And they measured also the anterior shear forces and also the compressive forces as well, which may be altered due to weak core muscles. So what they did, and with regards to the recruitment, so they recruited 8 healthy participants that were between the ages of 18 and 55 years old, had no previous history of lower back pain, and if they did, they were excluded, and they were between the ages of 18 and 55 years old. So what these individuals did is they came into the laboratory and they had them essentially just run a lap in the lab at their own self-selected pace, and they used a motion capture analysis software which picked up their running motion. They put it into a software which they can then manipulate and induce simulations of the running motions. So now I'm not the most familiar with the software, but it's called OpenSim, and what it allows them to essentially do is to then break down each muscle groups, or the muscle groups that they were looking at, the deep core muscles and also the superficial muscle groups as well, they're looking at, and they can induce muscle weakness. And so when they induce muscle weakness, so they started at baseline, which they didn't induce any weakness, and then it was increased to 20%, 40%, 60, 80, and ultimately 100%. And they were looking to see for any compensations, like I mentioned, if other muscles were working harder to allow them to basically run. So by inducing this muscle weakness and using the software, this allowed them, or which basically allowed them to maintain their kinematics, or allowed them to maintain their running motion while inducing this muscle weakness. So what that means is they were still running with the same technique and whatnot, even though they were inducing this muscle weakness, just other muscles had to compensate, and so that's what they were measuring, those forces. And essentially, what they found was really interesting, and this just goes to show the importance of core muscle development and core muscle strength in running. So firstly, if we break it down with some of these deep core muscles that they looked at, so looking at the quadratus lumborum, which is an important core stabilizer, when they induced this, or when they induced weakness in this muscle at 100%, they found that the deep erector spinae muscles compensated much more, as well as the psoas muscle compensated for that weakness. Also looking at the multifidus, the deep erector spinae also compensated, as well as the quadratus lumborum, latissimus dorsi, and the deep iliocostalis lumborum. As far as the psoas goes, the superficial iliocostalis lumborum, there was compensation there. And with the deep erector the deep erector spinae now, which was the most interesting one. So when they actually induced weakness in the deep erector spinae, they found that there was the most compensation in terms of muscle groups or muscles to compensate for that weakness. So they found compensation at the multifidus, quadratus lumborum, latissimus dorsi, and the superficial and deep iliocostalis lumborum, and at the deep longissimus thoracis. So it's interesting because when they induced 100% weakness at the deep erector spinae, they found that there was the most compensation in terms of other muscle groups to compensate for that muscle when it was weakened in order to maintain proper kinematics of running. Now, when looking at more of the compressive and shear forces, it is interesting to see as well. So they found that there was an increase in anterior shear force So at 100% weakness in all muscle groups, there was a significant increase between the L1 and L4 of anterior shear forces. Now through the L5 through S1, there was not a significant increase, but there was a trend upwards in terms of as they increased that weakness, there was more shear loading, but it wasn't a significant result, but still something to be noted of. Now, if we were to break it down into just kind of separate muscle groups now and looking at their kind of compressive and shear forces, and what they found in terms of significance was that at the QL, the shear force, so when they induced 100% weakness at the QL, there was a significant increase in shear loading at the L2 and L3 level, but nothing significant at any of the other levels for compression or shear between the T12 and S1. In terms of the multifidus, there was a significant increase in compression and shear at the T12 to L1 and L1, L2. For the psoas, there was a statistically significant increase at the L405 and L5S1 for shear force, and then the deep erector spinae muscles, compression and shear was significantly increased at the T12L1, L1L2, shear only at the L2L3, L3L4, there was compression and shear significant increase, and then a significant increase in compression at L4L5, L5S1. Then when you break down when all deep muscle groups were weakened, compression and then shear significantly increased at T12L1, L1L2, L2L3 only shear, L3L4, L4L5 only compression, L5S1 only compression. Now I kind of just mentioned all these results and you might be a little bit confused what all this means and whatnot, but the important takeaway with all of this is that the deep core musculature, when we consider quadratus lumborum, multifidus, psoas, our deep erector spinae muscles, whenever they are weakened or whatnot, there's going to be an alteration in the forces placed onto our spine and at certain segments, and at the same time, other muscles are going to compensate for those weaker muscles. So by muscles compensating for weaker muscles, we have a greater force production in those muscles that are compensating. So the muscles that are compensating by increasing force production, what ends up happening is if we're running, for instance, those muscles are going to have to work harder, so they may be more susceptible to fatigue. So what ends up happening is when these muscles that are compensating become fatigued, this may put us at a greater risk for injury for those muscles, but at the same time, this may increase the shear and compressive forces as well. But this may also alter the way we run and in our technique, because as those muscles become fatigued, we may engage in more twisting motion, flexion motion, lateral bending, or extension when we're running. And this can cause an unusual loading of the spine, and it can cause maybe some sort of instability with regards to the spine, and the loading is going to change because of that, and because of those muscles becoming fatigued. So this furthermore just kind of stresses the importance of why we need a strong core. And this is one of the important reasons, and one study that is specifically showing this, and it's specific to runners now, which is very interesting, but this just goes to show how important core stability is and why we need to develop that core in order to maintain a healthy spine, especially if we are someone that is involved in a running sport or running-based activity. So with all that being said, guys, this study is very interesting, and I'll say the reason being is because this can be applied to anyone that is involved in running or a running sport. And if you're looking to really look at the long-term health of your spine, especially if you're someone that has existing lower back issues, this just kind of further stresses the importance of why you need to develop a strong core musculature. Now, when we talk about the erector spinae muscles or maybe the QL muscle, when we kind of look at the bigger picture here, we can test for weakness using various muscular endurance tests. Maybe that's some sort of an extension test for the erector spinae, or maybe that's some sort of lateral stability test for the quadratus lumborum. And then if we identify weakness, we can then implement the proper exercise program or prescription for them. So for example, maybe we find they have a weak QL on maybe their left side. So maybe we have to implement suitcase carries to develop that quadratus lumborum. Maybe if we find weak erector spinae muscles, we have to do some more maybe bird dogs. We can implement exercise like bird dogs to develop that extensor musculature. So ultimately though, that's just kind of tying things all together and how we can look at taking the research and then applying it in terms of a strength and conditioning perspective for an individual who is a runner or looking to prevent lower back pain. With all that being said, guys, that is kind of it for this video though. If you have any questions, comments, you found this research interesting, I personally find this very interesting. This is one of the kind of the first studies that I've actually seen looking at core stability and its effects on running and whatnot, and just looking at the importance of it in terms of maybe preventing a future lower back injury, specifically a facet joint problem or maybe a disc issue. Very interesting stuff, and just kind of stresses why we need core stability and core strength. Okay guys, so that's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and until next time, I wish you guys all the best and a successful and productive day, and take care.